1 week. That was all Zelensky gave him. Remove the equipment helping Russia kill Ukrainian civilians from your territory, or Ukraine will remove it for you. Lukashenko said nothing. And then, 3 days before the deadline, the relay stations went dark. No statement, no press conference, no acknowledgement from Minsk that anything had happened at all. Just silence. And equipment that had been guiding Russian drones into Ukraine, suddenly offline. This is the story of how Ukraine just changed the rules of this war. Not on the battlefield, in the space between countries, in the gray zone where allies provide support without officially joining a fight. That gray zone just got a lot more dangerous for Moscow's partners. To understand why this matters so much, you need to understand what those relay stations were actually doing. Because most coverage has skipped past the technical detail that makes this story genuinely significant. Russia's long-range drones, the Geren and Gerbera types used to attack Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, don't navigate by satellite signal alone. They rely on a mesh communication network. Drones equipped with cameras and specialized modems act as airborne relay nodes for each other, allowing the pilot's video feed and control signal to be maintained across hundreds of kilometers. But mesh networks have range limits, and that's where Belarus came in. Relay stations mounted on Belarusian communications towers along the border extended that network, boosting the video link between Russian drone operators and their weapons as they crossed into Ukrainian airspace. In effect, Belarusian infrastructure was acting as the nervous system for Russian drone strikes on Ukrainian cities. As of March 2026, Ukrainian intelligence had identified at least 4 of these stations on Belarusian territory, and the tactical consequence was severe. Russian drones were routinely flying just 5 to 10 kilometers inside the Belarus-Ukraine border before turning south. Close enough to use the relay network, far enough to stay out of effective Ukrainian air defense range. This is not a theoretical vulnerability. Ukrainian cities in the north, Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, have been among the most frequently targeted by Russian drone campaigns precisely because the northern corridor offered the shortest flight path with the least interception risk. Every major Shahed attack wave that came from the north benefited, at least in part, from the relay infrastructure that Belarusian towers were hosting. Because here is the problem Ukraine could not solve with missiles or drones alone. Positioning air defense systems close to the Belarusian border would expose them to Russian reconnaissance. So Ukraine had a gap in its northern coverage, and Russia was threading drones through that gap, guided by equipment on territory Ukraine couldn't legally strike. That was the situation on June 19th, when Zelensky walked into a joint press conference and made an announcement that reframed this entire dimension of the war. He named the problem publicly, he named the territory, he named the deadline. There are relay stations on the towers, he said. Can he take them down? What's the point of saying he doesn't want war? Just take down that equipment. If he doesn't do it, we will. 1 week. Now watch what happened next, because it reveals the actual balance of power in Minsk's relationship with Moscow far more clearly than any diplomatic statement ever could. Lukashenko said nothing publicly. No denial, no confirmation, no acknowledgement that an ultimatum had even been issued. But on June 22nd, and 3 days before the deadline, Ukrainian intelligence reported the relay stations had stopped transmitting. Chief of Staff Syrsky confirmed it. Border Guard spokesperson Andriy Demchenko confirmed a measurable drop in Russian drone transits through the Chernihiv region. Mass Shahed drone raids along the Belarus-Ukraine border ceased. When Zelensky addressed reporters on June 24th, his words were careful but clear. The equipment stopped operating on June 22nd. Whether it had been physically dismantled, he didn't know. But it was no longer functioning. Silent compliance from a man who claims to be Moscow's closest ally. Let that sit for a moment. There are 2 ways to read this outcome, and both of them are unfavorable for Russia. The first reading, Lukashenko quietly removed or disabled the stations to avoid Ukrainian strikes on Belarusian territory. In this version, Ukraine's ultimatum worked. Minsk calculated that the risk of becoming a direct target outweighed the benefit of hosting Russian relay infrastructure, and acted accordingly, without telling Moscow publicly. The second reading, Russia itself disabled the stations either to protect the equipment from Ukrainian action or to deny Zelensky a visible victory. In this version, Moscow blinked. prioritizing the preservation of its technical assets over the continued operational benefit of the relay network. Either way, Ukraine's ultimatum produced a result. Either Lukashenko defied Moscow's operational requirements to protect his own territory, or Moscow sacrificed its own capability to avoid handing Ukraine a propaganda win. Both outcomes represent a fracture in the Russia-Belarus partnership, small but real. And Lukashenko himself, in a rare moment of candor, already told you what the underlying calculation is. He said Belarus would face serious risks if Ukraine began striking its territory the way it currently strikes Russia. He acknowledged his country possesses far fewer air defense assets than Russia, which is already struggling to defend itself. He has 500 reasons to take that seriously. That's the number of targets inside Belarus that Ukraine's drone forces commander says have already been identified and mapped. Military installations, airfields, factories producing components for Russian armored vehicles and missile systems, and fuel depots supplying the Russian military. Lukashenko's response to that figure was telling. He confirmed it indirectly, and then pointed out that Belarus has one very serious target of its own with precise coordinates, not far from the border. He meant Kiev. 90 kilometers away, it was a threat. But it was also an admission that his deterrence runs in one direction only. Belarus can threaten, it cannot absorb. Now, step back and look at what this episode reveals about the broader shape of this war in mid-2026. Ukraine is no longer confining its pressure to Russian territory. It has now demonstrated, without firing a single shot, or near, that it can coerce a third country into withdrawing support infrastructure for Russian military operations. That is a meaningful escalation of Ukraine's strategic posture, not a military one, a coercive one. And it arrives at a moment when Russia's own network of support is already under extraordinary stress. Energy revenues down 34%. Crimea's fuel supply severed, Moscow's largest refinery struck. Railway and road access to the peninsula cut. Adding to that, a relay network on Belarusian territory that just went silent, whether because Lukashenko complied or because Moscow withdrew it rather than risk losing it. And Minsk, for the first time in this war, is publicly on record acknowledging it cannot withstand what Ukraine can deliver. That is not a small thing. It is the first time in this war that a state actively supporting Russian operations has been publicly pressured, and has visibly backed down. The precedent it sets is significant. If Ukraine can coerce Belarus without firing a shot, the question every other country quietly supporting Russian logistics and production must now ask itself is, am I next? Lukashenko has ruled Belarus since 1994. He has survived sanctions, protests, and international isolation by staying close to Moscow. But what Ukraine has now shown him, speaks quietly without a single strike, is that Moscow's protection has limits. And those limits are getting closer. The drone corridor through northern Ukraine is narrower tonight than it was last week. Lukashenko still hasn't said a word, and that silence tells you everything.